let's look at the humerus now. So our first structure is the humeral head, and the humeral head is pointed upwards and medially and slightly posteriorly. Being careful not to color in the greater tuberosity, just the head, and there it is in red. Anatomical neck is just right below the head, right there. Man, do I have the loudest mouse in the world, or is it just me? Okay. And then the greater tuberosity is right here. I kind of drew the neck over it here, but it's right there. And the greater tuberosity has 3 facets on it that are going to be very difficult to draw here, but pretend for a second we were looking at a lateral view. It would look like this. We would have one in the transverse plane, one kind of at an angle, and one running superior inferior. And that would be the superior facet, middle facet, and inferior. And on the model video, I think I tried to show that there are muscles inserting on each of those. So those are all muscle attachments. And they're just named for their position. So superior, middle, and inferior. Lesser tuberosity. Let's do lesser tuberosity in green, I guess. It's right here. And the posterior view, we can't really see it. And you know what, I'm going to amend my, kind of got a little carried away on the greater. It's just, from the back, it's really just this area. Alright, so lesser tuberosity was green. Intertuberoscular groove, IT groove, or you can also say bicipital groove is right here. It gets a little hard to label the lips, the lateral and medial lips, but the part of this groove that's adjacent to the greater tuberosity is the lateral lip, and the part that's adjacent to the lesser tuberosity is the medial lip. The surgical neck's already sort of been drawn in here for you, this little dotted line, but we can go ahead and make it a little bit more obvious. Surgical neck. And that is it for the proximal end. The shaft is a triangle when you look at it in cross-section, just like the radius and ulna and soon to be femur and tibia. So we're kind of used to this setup, I hope, by now. So we're going to have 3 borders and 3 surfaces. So anterior border, medial border because it's on the side of the humeral head, so we know it's medial, and lateral border. Then we have a posterior surface, a medial surface, and a lateral surface. And those are your 3 borders and surfaces. We have a couple structures on the shaft besides just the surfaces. So one is right here, it's called the Deltoid Tuberosity. It's almost midway down the bone, a little bit more proximal, so not quite halfway down the shaft. And that's an insertion for your deltoid muscles. So it's a pretty large tuberosity, but it's tough to see because it's not really raised very much. So hopefully on the real bone it's a little bit easier, or on the model video. Radial groove is easy to see here, very difficult to see in real life. They drew a nice groove in there for you. Radial groove, and that's a groove for the radial nerve that runs behind your humerus. Okay, we have 2 supracondylar ridges. We have a medial supracondylar ridge and a lateral supracondylar ridge. And they're just right above the 2 epicondyles here and above the condyles as well. That's where they get their name. So let's look at the distal end. We have the olecranon fossa in the back. The olecranon process will sort of fit into that. And then on the front, we have two more fossas. We have the radial fossa, which is where the head of the radius will sit when your arm is flexed. Right there. And we have the coronoid fossa. The coronoid of the ulna will kind of sit in there when your arm is flexed as well. And that brings us to our two condyles, which are pretty interesting looking on the humerus. We have this thing here called the trochlea, named after a spool of thread. Kind of looks like that, I guess. It's also called the medial condyle. And then right next to it, we have the lateral condyle, or the capitulum. So those are your two condyles, and then we have epicondyles. So here is the lateral epicondyle. There's a whole bunch of muscles that attach off these epicondyles. All of your forearm muscles, for example. Well, not all, but most. And then here's your medial epicondyle. Your medial epicondyle is really obvious. The lateral epicondyle is much smaller. And that brings us to our last structure called the ulnar groove. And it is right there. And that's a groove for our ulnar nerve. So if you ever hit your funny bone, you know what I'm talking about. We can add a couple of things in here from the posterior view. So there's the back of the trochlea. Here is the back of the epicondyle, the medial epicondyle, and lateral. And you could do the supracondylar ridges as well. This would be the medial supracondylar ridge and the lateral supracondylar ridge. And that's it for the humerus.